to the latest edition of The Innabooters, a podcast designed to find out more about people who live, breathe, have been born and work here in Aberdeen, or have gone further afield, or have come from further afield to enjoy the northeast of Scotland. And it's finding out more about them, what makes them tick, and their connection to the northeast. It's brought to you by ifb.net, and I'm your host, Graeme Gordon, and I'm delighted to say that this episode we're joined by Jim Savege. Jim, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for joining us. So always with our guests, we ask you to tell us who you are, who we got, what you do and who you do it for. Over to you.
So I'm Jim Savege. I'm the Chief Executive for Aberdeenshire Council, and that's working with 16,000 people across Aberdeenshire, providing a pretty big and important range of services day in, day out.
And your connection to the city and the Shire in the northeast of Scotland, how have you come to be here?
Well, I've been in the job for 9 years now, so arrived into Aberdeenshire and started a job and sort of moved up within a few weeks and got on with it. And we're really, it's the opportunity of the job that came up that brought us up here. But as soon as I came here and talking to my parents actually in terms of the job, they says, "Oh yes, well you've been here, there, and everywhere." And the background is that my grandparents stayed in Montrose in an Arbroath, and I spent a lot of my childhood holidays in Arbroath and then coming up into this area for various day trips, which my father had done all the way through his childhood as well. And I then go back in history and see that my great-great-great-great-grandfather was the Provost of Montrose. My grandfather and great-uncle both trained as medics in Aberdeen University. So there's roots and heritage around here that you bump into and find out about as once you arrive as well. So that's the background. It's been quite joyful just coming here and then finding all of that out as you go.
And did you find that out once you'd come into the area? Were you aware of it at all? Do you think that maybe made up the makeup, you think?
I knew a bit of it, but I didn't know the depth of it. And then my brother-in-law is from Turriff, so he's born and bred from there. His family's still here as well. So we knew bits of it, but once you hear, then the richness of it starts to come and grab you a bit more and tickle you some more as well.
That is deep-rooted. I think that has to be the most deep-rooted history we've had of anybody on the podcast so far, which is fantastic. But if we could talk about you for a little bit more, we'll get to the immediate history, that last 9 years in a little bit. But the journey that's got you here in terms of Jim, the person, what you've done, how you've got here, was there a natural progression to the role you're in? Because it's a difficult role. How did it end here?
Oh, gosh, well, there's no way there's a natural journey or progression. So, I'll do a very quick potted history. I was at school. I wanted to join the Marines or the Air Force. I did neither. I went off to college and trained as a teacher in Liverpool, taught for a while, field studies, then went into academia and pretended to do another degree, didn't quite finish it as you do, got into management training, management consultancy, and then took a job in local government in Staffordshire, and I was doing a SAP HR implementation, as you do, and restructuring some of the HR services for the council down there in Staffordshire. Ended up staying there, worked there for 6.5 years. Moved up to Cumbria County Council as the head of personnel there, and then did a lot of different jobs there in Cumbria. Sort of ended up, did a whole range of different roles there, sort of transport, waste, sort of planning, sort of lots of different services. And then a job came up in Aberdeenshire, and I've been here for 9 years. So really just, I think, a leapfrog from, I guess, role to role, as many people do, building on the experience, but really quite grounded in terms of working public services for the past 21, 22 years.
And that public services part, is that something that you've always felt natural, working with people from a teaching background? Is it because it's a challenging environment? And I remember one chief exec saying that all your sales figures are in front of the papers and the population every day, whereas we don't suffer that. You're judged on a daily basis, if not more so now than ever before. How's that felt as you've gone in there? Is that drive to keep people well and safe and thriving?
My dad was a GP, my mother was a health visitor, my sister's a nurse, my grandfather was a doctor, GP as well. So there's something there, I think, in genes in terms of public service there. And yeah, I trained as a teacher, so I think there's probably something there which is about wanting to do something which is for the greater good or benefit, which has been part of my DNA, sort of driving there. Just on a really day-to-day basis, just it's immensely fulfilling in terms of doing things which you can see make people smile, and are really meaningful for their day-to-day lives. When I was doing some consultancy work years and years ago, I did some work with Walker's Crisps, as you do. And I remember walking out of the office there one day, and there was a ticker tape there which said, "How many bags of crisps have you helped sell today?" And I was like, "Oh, you really are plugging the debts when that's the motivation for you." So I think actually helping, like I've sort of like mentoring some young people last week, when you're doing that, as opposed to selling bags of crisps, I think that's the motivation piece for me.
And it feels, I mean, knowing you as lightly as I do, I mean, I don't know you well, confess to knowing you well, but you seem to have that 360 view on life as you move through it. You're not only looking forward, but you are looking sideways and a bit behind as well in terms of that mentoring or relationship building to help be positive for others. It comes very naturally from you. And you think that's a family thing? You think it's a trait that's come from a nurturing family with that view on life?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's a very supportive family background, a very supportive wider sort of network. I think I've been well supported by a great peer group as I've gone through my career. People have been very generous to me just in terms of sort of being good and helpful, and generous in terms of helping me on my way at every stage. And I think it's the reciprocation as well. So I can think of many moments and times whereby someone's just been there for me. And, for me, I think it's the balance of leading an organisation of the scale you got at the council, but also doing something which makes a difference to one person's life on a day-to-day basis.
That people focused, helping others, family environment has obviously had an impact on you as you've progressed forward.
Yeah, so I think I've been recipient and benefiting from a very good network of friends, family, and colleagues through my career. There's always been people there to look out for me, support me, help me in many different shape or form. And you just realise what that generosity does for you when you just pause and take stock on it. And I think it's something that it feels really important. So in a way, it's dead easy to turn up to work and go and do the organisation stuff. I think it takes that extra effort to go and make an impact and a benefit for an individual person's life day in, day out. And I think it's important for me to do both. It keeps me grounded. And I think there's a reciprocation between the two. So, when I'm making some of the bigger decisions at a sort of a corporate level, I'm absolutely grounded in terms of what it means for that young person or that individual person each day as well. So I think it's, if the role is about doing something to help people, it's got to be at all levels that you do it as well. And it's reciprocation back. I've been helped, so you help back out as well.
And that comfort factor and confidence factor, if I may say so, maybe spills across into, I follow you on social media, as lots of people do, and you pop up into some extreme places that I go, hang on, wait a minute. And the dog's always there as well, which is amazing. I mean, I'd love to have that dog's life. But do you think that you might not feel as extreme sports, but adventure sports that you're involved in, is that maybe back to a hankering to join the Marines? Is that a niche that was always there? Do you want to do something quite adventurous?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I've always been an active person, so I've always been in sort of like cross country ran and played rugby and stuff when I was a kid, and I've always been active. And maybe I don't know. I could say it's about how much cake I like to eat, and I've got to keep a balance on it. So you've got to get out. But I think there's also a contrast. I do recall, I chose going down a different career path and continuing to do stuff that was quite active because I wanted to do stuff for myself, and it feeds different parts of me. So you think about my sort of profligate spraying on social media. I think that's part also about being up here in the northeast and just celebrating the splendour of where we are, and just reflecting that life is about the totality of what we do here. It's about work, but it's also about life, and it's about personal connections and connectivity in terms of what we do. So I like being active, but it's just about sort of like celebrating the splendour of what we've got around us as well.
Do you think that's something that somebody from Aberdeen or the Northeast probably doesn't celebrate enough. I think it's probably indicative of any area that locals tend not to embrace it as much, but we do have a wealth from the beach all the way through to the highest peak, all within a pretty distance.
Yeah.
And you do the rounds there.
Yeah, no, I remember I lived in Mid Wales for like a fair few years, and I remember my neighbour there, a lovely sort of man. We were just sort of near a mountain called Cadamidras there, and he'd never been up there in his life. He was born and bred in the village, and some people just don't go and do that sort of stuff. And I would just like look at him as though he was come off the planet Zog for not doing that. So I think that's always the deal, is that people don't always realise what they've got on their doorstep. But then I respect that different folks got different things they want to get out from a place. I do think actually for Aberdeenshire and the North East, I think there's actually a more universal celebration what we've got. There's whatever you want here, I would say, is you reflected from the mountains, the sea, from being active through to cultural activity, sort of the whole 9 yards. Whatever you want to do here, you can do. And in the main, I see people walking around with smiles on their faces and actually talking up the place in that respect as well. So I get sometimes there can be that thing which is about saying, oh, the Northeast is going to be a bit dour. That's said about everywhere I've lived, to be honest. So, and I think it's actually pretty okay here.
I think at least we speak to each other as we walk down the street or get onto public transport, unlike some of the cities in the UK. I think there is a Aberdeen's a big town and a small city, and I think if you take I think 500,000 or so within the northeast of Scotland as a population, that's quite a community. That's a large community and a large spirit there, and I think the spirit just traverse much more across that much more easily than some of the larger cities that are more urban, so to speak.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I get into bother in some ways when I'm sort of going down into Glasgow for work or down into London. You say hello to people on the street and they look at you, you're just about to go and, I don't know, be inappropriate or something to them and just like nab their coffee or something. But I think that's the joy of here. It is an immensely friendly, welcoming place. That again, back into what I said before, people are out to help each other. There's a smile on people's faces in the main. It's collegiate, it's personable, it's social. I think it's lovely, and I think that's a real positive attribute which I sort of cling on to very strongly about here, is that friendliness and the warmth.
I mean, we talk a little bit about technology in the podcast, about what piece of tech you think has sort of changed your life or your career as you move through it. But maybe just give you a moment to think about that. In the 9 years that you've been here, do you think technology's helped promote Aberdeen and the northeast of Scotland to ourselves and other parts of the world better than before? The obvious answer is yes, but I think it's been used quite constructively.
Yeah, I've got it. I'll probably come across as a complete Luddite because I'd be quite simplistic about it. I would say two things I think are sort of being really positive in terms of our ability to work and the promotion. I think the whole social media piece, in terms of the ability for sort of people like me to like sort of spray large on Twitter or X or on Instagram, has been phenomenal in terms of having a reach. And I started using Twitter as it was, probably about, again, 11 years ago. And again, from a work point of view, it helped create and form relationships with people that you'd never get to know otherwise. From a community point of view, you get to know each other more completely. You see into each other's lives in a more complete way. And there's actually, I think there's a depth there that you don't have just in terms of day-to-day interactions. So I think that whole social media piece of being able to, in a reasonable way, put yourself out there and actually form those relationships in a very broad network has been phenomenal. And I do think that that is used not just by us, but others, in terms of projecting and asserting out actually what the North East has got from a sort of a cultural or social or from a commercial point of view as well. And the other bit of tech, I would say that has been phenomenally helpful is to an extent is sort of sitting and working remotely. And I can think about when COVID came in, which was quite some event for all of us. When we had lockdown happening, the ability to just switch to complete remote working for the organisation was phenomenal. So clearly I had lots of sort of teachers' care staff, etc., all out and about there, still working out on site doing stuff. But for 2,500, 3,000 office-based workforce and staff. We just kept on going. So just like stay at home, follow the guidance, but switch your computers on. And that ability to work flexibly has been great. We've used it a lot as an organisation prior to COVID, saying that actually don't travel unnecessarily to an office just for the sake of it. Work in an office near to where you stay. Work from home. Work flexibly. I'm more interested about you getting a job done than you did the presenteeism stuff. And what I've seen there is, I think, a very positive impact and effect in terms of recruitment and retention, in terms of people liking that flexibility of working. We've not seen any downside in terms of performance and productivity and turnover. So we'll continue to deliver the goods as an organisation. It's great agility and flexibility. Positive impact in terms of carbon. Positive impact in terms of local economies of people shopping locally where they stay as opposed to elsewhere. So all in all, I think the ability to have that remote working, flexible working has been phenomenal. And I think it's a positive attribute for the Northeast to say to people, if you want to come and stay somewhere that's just amazing and you can still work wherever you want to, come and stay here as well. So rather than banging on about trying to reduce our journey times to Edinburgh by 20 minutes on a train, I think this is the game changer in terms of that flexibility, in terms of that sort of that global reach we've got. Years ago, I did some really random consultancy work trying to look about how we could get teams from Glasgow to work in Australia remotely to basically do a cut and shut on Australian warships. So it was quite a sort of a feisty piece of work to do that. New phased sonar array radars that were trying to put on there. And that was really mind-boggling to think about how we would actually get governed to go to Sydney in that way. And it didn't really work out. Whereas nowadays it's a complete reality. So I think there's a massive upside in terms of that flexibility of working in many different ways. Clearly, the downside is that whole thing of relationships. So I'm not the geek who loves sitting on the remote working all the time. We've got to have that relationship there as well. But I think as a positive attribute to give the agility, and I say that local investment in terms of economy, super positive.
I think that nobody could have predicted the pandemic, as you say, but what you're saying, you had a mindset toward, hey, look, enjoy your job, get the job done. Be flexible, be reliable, be dependable. All of these things. Be respectful, and if you've got that in a relationship, you will trust your teams to take because without broadband in the pandemic, it would have been a different kettle of fish for so many people. But the technology just came over us, and within 3 months, it was the norm. Yeah. But you had to have a mindset, certainly at your level, certainly at an executive team level, to say the team just have to be left to get on with this. They know what they need to get on with, but also you're attracting people into an area that they should be enjoying. And I think that's a really positive thing.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing as well, for me, which is about, as I said, we employ 16,000 people. I've got 2,700 young people, sort of their teachers who are working day in, day out. I've got 35,000 people in school every day. I don't plan every lesson. I don't teach every lesson. I've got some amazing people there who do this stuff phenomenally well. I've got to trust them and support them to do some really cool work every single day. And so that foundation of trust and empowerment and of localism is fundamental. I do my bit, but it's dependent on everyone else as well. So I think that culture piece is so strong. And that you look at a debate about sort of like how remote working is, I think it misses the point of actually those foundations you need to have in the first place just now.
I agree, but there is a generation of people who know what meeting people does, and I think, and we would be in that similar generation. I think that you can't pass over this first person touch in reality, but also the reality is we're now in a space and a culture that uses the technology every bit as well as going to a meeting that's 2 hours away. So there's a balance there, and I think I'm not saying that innovation is the reserve of young people and experience is the reserve of old people. There's a balance in there, and I think there's a generation between you and I that can help transfer that working and that culture up the way as well as down the way. And that mentoring part, I think, is very key, enablement.
I think it's a reverse mentor piece as well, because I think I will, in essence, bang on to say relationship and being sort of a personal body is really important, but I've also got to be open-minded to say that actually you said young people work in many different ways as well. So what's that new way of working come through as well? It sounds a bit cliched, but I think that I've also got to reciprocate an openness in terms of actually I've got to keep on learning as well.
Hmm. And how do you do that? How do you? We know that you're out there. The dog's name. I forget your dog's name. Sorry.
Nevis. He's
Nevis,
Nevis.
of course. Gee, how could I forget Nevis as a name? But you're out there with Nevis, and Nevis is keeping you on your toes, and you're keeping Nevis in it. But how do you keep yourself sharp? I mean, outdoors does help that without a doubt. But how do you keep yourself relevant? Do you feel is that engagement with other people in and out of the sector?
I think it's a combination of both, really. So some of the outdoor stuff is about just like continuing to just push yourself a bit, to have a bit of humility out and about there, to just to test yourself and challenge yourself in some shape or form. And it's probably the same in a work situation as well. I've got a massive dose of humility and imposter syndrome, which are sort of there, which is about sort of make it up every single day. And that brings with me this sort of thing, that constant look out and about into who's doing what's going on, have they got a different angle of what we're doing. So I will very often pick up the phone to my colleagues, other chief execs in other authorities across the country, sort of speak to them a lot, and just to get the inside tracker angle in terms of what they're thinking, what they're doing, how they're going about stuff as well. So I think I'm an avid sort of an inquisitive person who just wanting to just keep abreast in terms of what's going on in terms of that one. So conversation on sort of bit of reading there. But I think the start of that is just the humility, which is about there's always something I don't know that I just need to go and have a bit of a sniff about.
Mm-hmm. And we talk about personality traits. Do you think that's your most important personality trait? A bit of humility, a bit of, I mean, what would you define as your most important personality trait?
God, it could be easy for other people to answer. I would say two things I would go for if I could do a combination.
Of course, yeah.
I think that pragmatism and calmness. So quite often there's a lot of things you have to deal with here that you could send you getting a bit excited. And I think what people need quite often is calm. And just the ability just to be measured and then pragmatic in terms of what you do. So I think those are the two traits. It can be pretty demanding at times about what you've got to do something under the job. There's a huge responsibility there, but just keeping a level head on it and trusting your team and thinking about how to get on with stuff, I think is that it. So try not to make it too much rocket science, really, in terms of what I'm doing. So it's the calm and pragmatic approach, which I think is probably the things I bring through to the work on a day-to-day basis that I think are good attributes.
Calmness is a wonderful one. It's one that I've adopted and learned to adopt far too late in life. I wish I could tell would I change much about what I did in earlier life? I probably wouldn't, because I wouldn't be where I am. But that control and calmness, and how would you do that? Those are key questions, and then sit back and listen to the answer. That brings calmness to a situation, regardless of how heated it is. What is it you need out of the situation? And getting that out there quite quickly, doesn't matter what the circumstances, does calm it down. It's a great trait to comment on. We're going to move into a quick fire round just in a second, but just before we get there, you've come to Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire 9 years ago. You've fully embraced all the best bits of what we got and probably some of the worst bits. We'll get to a couple of those in a second. So if somebody's watching this podcast and listening to the series and thinking about relocating here for a job in education or hospitality or engineering, what advice, what are the gotchas that you would say that you could offer them up, maybe 2 or 3 points?
Well, I think it's an amazing area in terms of giving whatever career opportunity you want. There's every single role or organisation here coming out of your ears. So there's something for everybody here that's going to suit you. I think the environment is phenomenal in terms of the diversity of places or things to sort of have in your life, sort of week in, week out. And I think that the community is phenomenal as well. It's a very capable, it's a very welcoming, it's a very resilient community as well, all in all. So I think there's a bunch of really great folk that you find yourself living and working alongside that is an attraction. And I guess many places would say that, but I think the combination is pretty special here. We always see that, which is about, people say, well, where's the Northeast? But once you get there, then you're not going to be leaving very quickly. We see that. We've got a growing population here. We've got an aging population. We're doing something right. So come and join the masses.
Great statement. I'll speak to Chris Foy about getting you on record for that one, so we'll take it from there. So, Jim, we're 4 quick fire questions, and because it's you, most of them One of them will be about food and the other three will be about the outdoors. So seaside or Deeside?
Oh, Deeside.
On your bike or taking a hike?
Taking a hike.
Benahee or Ben the Hoose?
Benahee.
There you go. And rowie or fine piece?
Fine piece, definitely.
Oh, yes. We are 50-50 in fine pieces and rowies currently.
Maybe there's a combination to be had there, and that's the innovation to go for.
We'll maybe take you up on that one. Jim, it's been fantastic talking to you today. Thank you for giving up your time, and thank you for becoming an Inabuta.
Real pleasure. Good to speak to you, Graeme.
Thank you.